Hello and welcome everybody. I am here to give you a brief presentation on our modules for test anxiety related to the use of mindfulness to help manage some of the anxiety that might come up related to taking tests, studying for tests, and overall being able to use the tools of mindfulness to really maximize our performance and to feel as confident as possible performing on tests. We're going to start by kind of asking the question of what is mindfulness. Many of you may have already heard about this as a term that's been out there and has been talked about in a lot of different settings and in different ways. And so the question is, what is mindfulness though? And we're going to start with that. And a basic definition that we'll go through has 4 components, and this comes to us from Jon Kabat-Zinn. And it includes paying attention to the present moment on purpose and with compassion. And those are our 4 components, and so we'll kind of break those down. Of number 1, paying attention. It's directing our attention. It's taking our mind and it's bringing it to the present moment. It's bringing it to the here and now in a way that helps us not worry too much about what might have happened in the past or what might be to come in the future, but it helps us kind of settle our attention and our focus on what's happening right in the moment in front of us. And it's something that happens on purpose, which means it's something that we choose to do. It's something that we can practice, and it's something that we can get better at with time. And then it's something that we do with compassion, recognizing that this takes some effort. It might not be easy. It might not happen perfectly the first time, and it might not continue to happen perfectly, but each time we approach that present moment with a sense of compassion, with a sense of openness, with a sense of non-judgmental awareness of whatever it is that we might be experiencing or noticing in that particular moment. So this is kind of generally our brief definition of what mindfulness is. And since many of you may have heard about mindfulness, there's a lot of ways that it gets mentioned or considered. And so I wanted to continue this discussion of what it is by talking a little bit about some of the myths of mindfulness to help us be more familiar with what it actually is. And so the first myth that we deal with is the idea that mindfulness is all in your mind. And when in reality, the idea of mindfulness comes from the idea that we are connected, our mind and our body and our spirit and our experience is all connected. And so reality, mindfulness begins and ends in our body, and it constitutes us noticing what we're feeling and what we're experiencing in a particular moment with, like we said, with compassion and with curiosity and being sort of non-judgmental about what we might be experiencing in our body. The second myth that we might have encountered is that mindfulness is relaxation. And this is not necessarily true, and that while doing mindfulness might result in feeling more relaxed, more settled, it's very possible to practice mindful awareness and to practice mindfulness even during very distressing or very difficult circumstances when we might be feeling a lot of emotion or we might be feeling particularly worried about something. To be able to use mindfulness in those moments means that we're able to pay attention to when we are feeling that a particular way, and then being able to approach it in the most effective or most helpful way, which kind of leads to our third myth, which is that mindfulness is a way of getting rid of anxiety. And this is a common one. A lot of the people that I talk to say that they maybe think that we're talking about mindfulness as a means of getting rid of a particular kind of experience or of making them feel less anxious. And we want to shift that a little bit to where in reality, mindfulness is a way to help us notice and pay attention to the things that are making us anxious. And the more we can pay attention and the more curious and open we can be about what we might be feeling, then that allows us to respond more effectively. That it doesn't necessarily just, we don't just react or we don't just avoid, and it doesn't necessarily get rid of the unpleasant feelings, but it helps us to respond to some of the unpleasant feelings in the most helpful way so that we don't dig ourselves into a deeper hole but that we can refocus, recenter, and then feel a little bit more settled and in control. The last myth that we often come across is that practicing mindfulness is easy. And in reality, practicing mindfulness can be very difficult. And in fact, we are supposed to, in a sense, fail some of the times because mindfulness sort of includes noticing when our mind might be distracted or when we might be getting away from the present moment, and then gently inviting our mind or our awareness back to what's happening in the present moment, and that really drifting to worries from the future or about the past are more opportunities to invite our mind back to the present with compassion. But the reality is that this can be a fairly difficult skill to learn. It can be a challenging thing to be able to do. And so we'll talk a little bit in our next step here about how to do a mindfulness exercise. And there's a lot of different kinds of mindfulness exercises we might use. But the general structure of using one that might be a grounding exercise is to start just by pausing for a moment. You create some time, even as little as 30 seconds. And we pause and we become intentional to take a few deep, slow breaths in and out. And then we begin to just notice what it feels like to have your lungs fill with air and then deflate. Notice any feelings or sensations that might be in your body. And then notice if your mind starts to drift to something in the future or in the past. And then what we do is we just gently redirect. We invite our attention back to our breathing each time that we notice that our mind wanders. And we can do this just simple exercise in a short space of time, or we can practice doing it for an extended period of time. But it's fairly straightforward, even if it is a little bit difficult to practice or get the skill of right away. Now, the question is, how do we use mindfulness for tests, or specifically for test anxiety? And so there's three primary areas that we think about using mindfulness related to tests and test anxiety. The number one would be using mindfulness exercises to prepare. This would be taking opportunities while we're studying that can help us increase our attention and our retention to the materials that's in front of us. And you might imagine that test anxiety can get in your way because as you're trying to study, your mind is constantly being dragged to the day of the test, thinking about how you're going to feel, wondering how you're going to do, and recognizing that each time that your mind gets dragged into the future when you might be taking the test while you're trying to study, it really takes you out of that ability to study effectively in the moment. And so what mindfulness can allow us to do is to sort of redirect or put the brakes on those thought patterns that might really be getting in our way of being able to study as effectively as possible. So we can take some breaths and settle ourselves in those moments that we're working on studying to be as effective as possible. The second place to use mindfulness for tests is before the test. That we use mindfulness skills to keep our mind from wandering or catastrophizing and keeping your body steady. So we can use it to ground ourselves in that moment of the test, to stay focused when we notice that our mind might be going ahead or going in the back or behind us in the past, and maybe catastrophizing, and we can sort of redirect our attention to the present moment, to what is in front of us during with the task at hand. And then lastly, during the test, using brief grounding exercises can be helpful if you notice you're drifting or if your attention is being pulled away from the test. It can be used to redirect, come back to the present moment, take a few deep breaths, and be as effective as you can in that moment. Now, I notice that there's a lot of material to cover, and this might not necessarily be easy, but what I would encourage you to do is to take some of these skills and tips, go practice them, even taking a couple of opportunities each day, even if it's as much as 30 seconds to a minute, and practice using some of these mindfulness skills and seeing and just exploring ways that they might be helpful to manage some of the anxiety that you might be feeling around tests. If you need help, you can always be aware that the counseling services here at OSU-CHS are available, and we are more than happy to have you make an appointment and talk through a little bit more about how to use some of these skills effectively during your test taking.